Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Unlapped podcast. I'm Nicole Briscoe. I think we called out the anchor team, anchor team assemble. Because look who's here. We have the full cast of characters. Nate finally showed up. He decided to stop big timing us after his book debut. He's got time for us small people. Laurence also here because he's Mr. Consistent, and Katie is here because we finally pulled her away from the NBA for a week. So hi, how is everybody?
Awesome. Great to see you guys.
Yeah, it's good to have everyone back.
Yeah.
And sorry
welcome.
Sorry for turning into the diva post-book, but I'm back now. Yeah,
I've had a total diva.
Yeah. I know I've humbled myself. I'm now coming back to my roots, coming back to the pod.
Got it.
But yeah, no, it's wild. It's only been a couple of weeks, but it does feel like a lot longer time since we've all chatted about Formula One.
I'm pretty excited too. My voice has decided to hang in for us. It's been a little bit on the scratchy side the last couple of days, but I'm happy that it's hanging out here. Remember, if you're watching us on the ESPN F1 YouTube channel, first of all, thank you. It's a new thing for us. So if you're watching us there, remember, hit us with a subscribe and hang out with us there all season long. That's where you can catch all of ESPN's F1 content. And then if you're listening to us wherever else, you just, hit us with that 5-star review. And remember, we are here week in and week out throughout the year. So it's been another quiet week in Formula One, not really much to talk about. Ho-hum, status quo. I think, what was it, last week we were talking about the potential move for Red Bull to take Liam Lawson out and put Yuki Tsunoda back in. And we're doing this before the news is officially going to happen, but we're 99% sure it did. And guess what? That's what we now have. We have Yuki in the Red Bull, and we have Liam Lawson back with the Baby Bulls. So let's just kind of start there with our producer questions, because once again, they're being needy and they need to have their say in all of this. Their big question is, can Yuki actually be the difference maker? Can he be the one to finally tame this Red Bull, be the driver not named Max, who's got this under control? What do you think?
It's definitely not an easy task. That much we know for certain. I think Yuki's got the potential. Apparently in the simulator, he's been pretty on it. He's kind of picked out a few things already that perhaps had gone missing, like in Red Bull's understanding of this car. So that's just on the sim. Their hope is that he could help the development. I'm sure, in Max Verstappen, they have someone who can really develop that car, but their hope is that by having another experienced driver in the second seat in Yuki Tsunoda, they can start to work around some of these clear issues that they have with the car. But there's no way of knowing until you get to Q1 in Suzuka, which is not an easy track to come into a brand new car. There's no way of knowing until then exactly how it's going to play out, because that car is tough to drive on the limit. And I think, Yuki can do all the time he wants in the simulator. He did do a test in Abu Dhabi last year in last year's car, which had similar traits. But I think until he gets on track and really kind of figures out what happens when he really pushes it, that's a massive unknown.
I have to imagine this has to be such a surreal feeling for him. I mean, he even said last week at a Honda event that he never expected to be driving a Red Bull, especially in his home Grand Prix in Japan. I think, he said he doesn't want to raise the expectations too much, but he wants to obviously finish on the podium, but he's got to understand the car first. I just can't imagine, I know we've talked about this time and time again, he's been sitting there in good form for the longest time in front of Red Bull. And it's they've gone and made all these other decisions without him in the equation. And I just wonder, behind the scenes, finally what did it, that they said, it's now Yuki's time. And I really hope for his sake, because I think that he's bided his time. He's done what, obviously, team principals have asked of him early in his career. I really hope that he's able to capitalize on this opportunity and do a really nice job in front of his home crowd, because I think that would be epic.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Honda as well, dream scenario. Yeah. I don't think they ever would have imagined it. And they've got this special livery they're running for this race. Yeah. The two Red Bulls the Red Bull and the Racing Bull is going to look very, very similar this weekend. Laurence and I just went to an event where they were showing the new Red Bull. It looks absolutely magnificent. Really, really good job they've done with it. And yeah, for Honda, I think it's pretty much the perfect way to mark this occasion. It's strange. I mean, I'm just finishing off a feature that we're running tomorrow on Yuki. And the turnaround, Katie, to your point, is completely bizarre and baffling how we've got to this point, because Yuki has always been pretty consistent, especially over the last year or so. We always talk about Max being the teammate killer in Formula One, but you actually look at Tsunoda recently. You had Nick de Vries, Danny Rick, and Liam Lawson. Obviously, Ricciardo and Lawson both were kind of in and out of the car, but Yuki was pretty consistently quicker than those two guys, you know, when you look at results and stuff like that. So he's been doing this for a while. So you're right. And the thing I've been writing is, you know, none of that has changed dramatically over the last 2 months. When they made the call last year to put Lawson in over him, Tsunoda's form was still the consistent one. So something has changed in the background. You know, from what we understand, Honda's knocked a bit of money off of Red Bull's final engine payment for this year, which, you know, is never too bad a thing, especially when you paid a lot of money for Sergio Perez last season to give up that seat. You know, there's a bit of a hole in the finances for Red Bull. But I think it speaks so quickly, I think, to how scarred Red Bull are by that Sergio Perez experience last year. The fact that, you know, Perez very early on in the season, it was clear he's just hit a wall with this car. He's not confident. He's not driving well. And all year we heard Christian Horner say, we think Perez will turn this around. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Perez obviously didn't turn things around. They got rid of him at the end of the year. Lawson, I don't think had that credit in the bank with Red Bull. You know, they saw a kid who looked like deer in the headlights kind of look for a lot of the Chinese Grand Prix. And then suddenly they think, well, we've got a triple header coming up. We can either leave him in for another 3 races and he can be this bad again for 3. And somebody at Red Bull pointed out to Laurence and I earlier, which I did not realize, Liam Lawson's performance last week was the worst performance of a Red Bull driver ever. They'd never had a driver finish last before, which I need to go and fact check it. But I mean, you know, if that's somebody from Red Bull saying that, so, you know, really stark performance from them. And I think that they just realized that, like, Liam's in too deep, and we've got this guy Yuki here. I think it's a lot of questions because Red Bull have basically undone a mistake of their own making, and have potentially ruined the trajectory of another of their young drivers in doing so, because, you know, there's no guarantee Liam Lawson recovers from this. The timeline is now muddied. I don't even know what happens with Yuki. I mean, and also if Yuki doesn't do well, what happens then? I mean, you start getting to a point where you're like, well, will anyone actually join this Red Bull team if they know that Max Verstappen's Max Verstappen's teammate car is completely cursed? So I don't know. It's an interesting one, and
but it's not.
Yeah.
But it's not all that terribly surprising, because I think if you just look at Red Bull and some of the decisions that they have made, and sort of like the lack of self-awareness, which goes to a whole slew of topics. Like this, the way that they've handled it is not surprising. It's not. I'm glad that they're aware that they can't win the Constructors' Championship unless they have 2 drivers who are actually capable of doing it. But you're like, cool, great. Let's just say that Liam Lawson is the worst performing Red Bull driver of all time. Fine, great. How much of that is on your own? How much of that did you do to him? It can't possibly be entirely on Liam Lawson. Like, and there are a couple of ways that, like, I find myself annoyed with Red Bull for, like, lacking the self-awareness, because it's like, okay, if Max walks out the door, you go from being in the top 4 to being arguably the worst car on the grid, which one makes me respect Max so much more. I think I've said it a million times. The guy can drive a shoebox. We're seeing that more and more and more now. And he's taking what could arguably be the worst car on the grid and turning it into a title contender, which is not necessarily the fault of a rookie or Daniel Ricciardo or Sergio Perez. Like, if your car is that bad, maybe it's more of a credit to the fact that you have a genuine superstar, a generational talent. So I don't understand that. But I'm also of the mindset that everything about the way Liam Lawson has handled this, everything, the way that he handled the demotion, the way that he's handled sort of like the questions about when he was still in the Red Bull seat, there is a part of me that thinks he's going to be better for this, because he does have the talent. He does have the ability. And what he's going to learn from this is going to take him places. And I think, like, you know how, like, sometimes you have to have people who manufacture chips on their shoulders. He doesn't have to manufacture.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
they've
just given him a really big one. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And I'm of the impression, like, give him time, and he's going to have that time now, and then look out.
I think you have to hope that he has the resiliency to be able to come back from this, because this is, for a young guy, a career-defining moment, in my opinion. Like, this can either derail your career before it's even really begun because he's so young, or, to your point, Nicole, you come back stronger, you're able to learn from this, you're able to build from this, and somehow make it through on the other side and have an incredible Formula One long career. But to put him in this position, I think, is an unbelievably difficult position to be in at his age. And I hope that he's able to rebound from this, because not many people can. You have to have such strong mental fortitude to be able to do that, Laz.
No, absolutely. And we've got to remember is that he's 13 races into his Formula One career.
No.
So 11 races going into the season. He's added 2 more this year.
Baby.
And to expect, yeah, exactly. To expect someone, it feels like he's been around longer because he's had those across 2 seasons already. But yeah, to expect someone to be on it immediately in that scenario is asking a lot. And the problem I have here is not so much the decision they've made now. I actually think it's the right decision. It's that it wasn't made last year.
Yes.
And that belief that,
Right.
I mean, I guess they thought they were going to solve a lot of the issues with the car. Had they done that successfully, then, you know, you would have had a car that's easier to drive and perhaps Lawson would have been able to shine. But they haven't addressed those issues. So that's fundamentally the problem here. It's not Lawson's performance so much, although clearly he was, you know, in at the deep end and unable to cope with it. But it's just that they've built this car that is peak performance, actually pretty good. But you need to be able to drive like Max Verstappen to access that performance, and to not kind of round it off or not know how to round off those sharp edges and make it a more drivable car for any driver is a major failing of the team. They're aware of that. You know, Pierre Vacher, who's the technical director there now, has been saying this for a little while now. Even after Perez's bad season in 23, he was saying, you know, one of the biggest issues with our team, we've just won both world championships. One of the biggest issues with our team, so we haven't created a car that both drivers can maximize the potential of. And that's what they tried to do going into 24, and it just got worse. And each year it's just got worse. But then the other side to it is that if you do have a driver like Max Verstappen who is able to take that peak performance and access it and win world championships with it, do you then stop developing in that way and make the whole car a little bit slower to allow the second driver to come in? That's the issue they've got into, but definitely a failing of the team and not of Lawson.
Yes,
It's
you
not
do.
fair to-
Because what happens if Max Verstappen walks out the door? Sorry, Katie.
No, it's just not fair to expect a second driver to be able to tame the car the way that Max Verstappen does, because he's a generational talent. Not everybody can do that. Only one
Lack
person
of
can do that in
self-awareness.
the world.
Lack
Well,
of self-awareness.
And a bigger question on all this as well. I saw a meme, I think it was this morning. It just said, it's always sack Sergio Perez, sack Daniel Ricciardo, sack Liam Lawson. It's never sack Christian Horner. And what's interesting about this is, you know, what Red Bull is saying behind the scenes is kind of like, well, look, this was a decision between Horner and Marco and the shareholders. This is like a litany of mistakes that have been made over and over and over again. And you're like, who bears the responsibility for this? Because, yeah, I think Laurence is completely right. You know, the problems here have been there for a while. And if you know your car is difficult to handle, don't give it to a rookie for the big important season. So that's where I think this weekend, I'm not saying Christian Horner should get sacked, by the way, just as people get excited about all of that. But usually teams have some kind of accountability up at the top. You know, this decision was made by X, Y, Z. And I think that's what's so confusing about this to me, is that lack of self-awareness you talk about, Nicole, it's definitely there, but it's also like, well, is anyone actually going to turn around and say, yeah, we made a mistake here? Because at the moment, Red Bull hasn't said that.
I'm going to say something
and the other thing that's remarkable is when you look at the drivers that were available last year, okay, you know, you start to think, well, they kind of got Lawson and Suzuka. But no, Carlos Sainz was on the market. Carlos Sainz from the start of the year was out of a Ferrari driver the whole year, you know, all those options open to him to go anywhere on the grid. I think if a proper Red Bull offer had been placed, and Red Bull said they did consider him, but if they'd actually chased him and wanted him, they'd have 2 incredibly experienced drivers there at the moment. And I think in Carlos, a driver who would be able to deal with the Red Bull.
I mean, if I'm Sainz,
Carlos wanted that as well. That was his pick of those teams that were potentially looking for a driver. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Laurence. I mean, and also, you know, there was talk of maybe Albon being available. So yeah, there was just a list of guys last year, and what they did was they plumped for probably the least ready man for it that they had available. So yeah, that's just a great point about Sainz, and I think that's something worth us putting to Horner next week. Actually, like, what, you know, does this not just show that you've made this awful decision, you know, twofold, threefold?
I'm going to say something here, and this is not against Yuki, because I'm absolutely, like, in what Katie said, I'm all for him. Like, this is the dream scenario. He deserves a shot in that seat,
100%.
and then to have it in Japan and everything like that. So like what I'm saying right now is not against Yuki, but can you imagine if this weekend Yuki goes out there and the car really is a pig? He goes out there and Liam Lawson outperforms him.
Yeah, I mean, the car is as
could
bad
happen
this weekend as it was in Shanghai. You know, they haven't really. I mean, there might be a few developments on it, but I don't think there's anything that's gonna to change it. So what they're relying on is Yuki's ability to live with that and drive around it. And we're going to find out, yeah, like I said, Q1, you know, that's going to be so telling to see. And also, you know, in qualifying, like the pressure is on. I think this is what Liam really found, is that if you can't get those tires in the right window, you can't get the performance out of them, all of a sudden in modern F1, being 2 or 3 tenths off, you know, where you should be is massive. You're out in Q1 rather than through to Q3. And in reality, he was about 7-8 tenths off Max Verstappen consistently across all the qualifying performances. So I think Tsunoda's got to do a better job, but I don't think the car's going to be, you know, the car's not going to be magically better all of a sudden. It's just that I think he's going to have a little bit more experience to live with it. The silly thing is that if they had made this decision last year, as I keep saying, then he would have had testing to get used to it. He would have had 1.5 days in Bahrain, and by this point he would have had, you know, 2 races in Australia and China to further understand it. Instead, he's going to Suzuka, one of the scariest places in Formula One to drive a Formula One car. Not that F1 drivers get scared, but you know, it really is a tough track, and one that will not forgive you whatsoever the moment you put a wheel offline. And he's got to do it there. So yeah, it's really tough. But that car is, I don't think it's going to change anytime quick.
I think the key word you said is pressure. Like, obviously, we're looking at this as a surreal opportunity because it's in Japan. He finally gets this moment. He's deserving. He's been consistent. Why he was overlooked for so long, we can't answer that. Only Red Bull can. But this is a high pressure situation for him to be able to come in and deliver. And obviously, you guys lay out that the car is not an easy one to handle. I think for the environment and the culture and the atmosphere Red Bull has created, like anybody who steps into that seat, Yuki, hopefully he holds it for a long period of time and is successful. But if not, like in the back of your mind, what if Suzuka doesn't go well for him and he doesn't handle the car? You have in the back of your mind, there's this little voice like, they ousted Liam after 2 races. Like, we know Red Bull is ruthless. And so I just think that this is a really high pressure situation, and we shouldn't minimize that, because yes, it's an awesome opportunity, but God, like, it's like a double-edged sword for Yuki too, because he has to get as close as he can to Max.
Like, legitimately.
The good thing for Yuki is that they've run out of options.
That's what I was just going to ask. Like, what happens? What happens if, like, Yuki isn't the answer either?
Lawrence will be next man up at this point. The rate they're going through
just
people.
Came off his motorbike.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
He's ready.
Like,
yeah,
what?
Yeah, because Hadjar's nowhere near ready. You know, so they are.
No.
They've skipped a step almost, haven't they? In terms of it used to be Red Bull always had 2 drivers at the top team, and then a guy who was clearly ready to make the step up if they needed him to. And now they're just kind of all over the place with it. And yeah, my fear is that Yuki does struggle out the gate, especially, and then, you know. Yeah, and then where are you at that point? You're in a really bizarre situation, and the one thing for Yuki here that we have to say is this is the opportunity he's been begging for ages. So it's make or break for him. I know it's not the ideal way to come in, but he has a chance here to basically change the trajectory of his whole career. Whether he stays with Red Bull after this or not, you know, longer term, he has the ability to, because his contract's a weird one. We've been trying to work out if he can actually get out of his contract. Like if Red Bull have always had a clause, they can just extend him every year, which is kind of what's happened. But if he goes and does well, you think Yuki's probably in Formula One in a good spot for a long, long time. If he flames out as well, you know, you look at the way Perez's stock was so damaged last year. Does it really hurt Yuki's ability to then go somewhere else? You know, because the 2 Red Bull teams will be off the table. Does a team like Cadillac turn around and be like, oh, do we want a driver that's lacking that much confidence? So you're in this really bizarre situation for him now, where suddenly it's just make or break. And, you know, to the point we've all kind of been making, he's kind of got one hand tied behind his back already, because he's so unprepared, relatively speaking, to Max in that car.
How has the perception of Sergio Perez changed, do you think, in the first 2 races of the season?
Well, I think that was the biggest thing everyone was saying, wasn't it? It's like, well, look, this kind of contextualized what Perez was saying all along. And yeah, I saw there's a clip, isn't there, from Drive to Survive, this most recent one, where Checo is just saying, like, this car has gotten worse to drive over this season, and no one has listened to me. No one in the team has believed me. I think it's either from last year or maybe the year before. So from the new season or the season before. So yeah, I think he's starting to put that into a fresh light, I suppose.
All right, I want to close the loop on this situation because we sort of touched on it a second with Liam, and obviously I think he's got the chip on his shoulder, and I personally like the way that he's handled this entire situation. Like his social media posts were classy, they were sweet. I just liked it. I liked it, and I'm as excited as I am for Yuki this weekend. I'm also really excited for Liam to see the difference.
And he's a really good kid, Liam, as well. Just to
I know, like he's likable.
Yeah.
So
Well,
like, what do we expect from him?
I think that as well, Nicole. But the interesting thing I noticed is that on social media, it seemed that he didn't have a lot of goodwill among fans, Liam. I think there's a lot of quotes of his that people have picked up on, maybe didn't like so much. But everything I've dealt with him, he's a nice kid. Yeah, he's quite sure of himself, comes across a bit cockily, but find me an F1 driver that doesn't come across. Yeah, exactly. Like that's why they're there. So yeah, I think hopefully Racing Bulls is just a good way to kind of completely change that whole perception and just get back on with it. But we'll see if that happens.
Okay, so our favorite person on the planet, and by that I mean Guenther Steiner, because who doesn't love him? Our favorite person on the planet came out this week, and he's like, if I'm going to pick a Formula One champion for this year, I'm picking Oscar Piastri. To me, it doesn't seem like, oh, whoa, out of left field. Like, that seems like a pretty reasonable, and why not Oscar? Like he said, if I have to put money on it, I would put it on Oscar. Just like, what? I guess I'm sort of like, okay, obviously, like I don't feel like it's a duh thing to say. I feel like why wouldn't it be Oscar? Why couldn't it be him?
I think if it's Oscar, then it's not Lando, and that's the bigger point that's being made, because it does look at the moment, of course, this time last year Red Bull were dominating and we thought they were going to win by miles and they didn't. But at the moment it looks like McLaren have got the best car, and therefore it's likely to come down between those two. And funny enough, Nate and I were talking about this exact same thing as we were walking through Tokyo earlier today. And I think that if Lando's a more consistent driver, I think he's at the moment still the better of the two drivers. So if he can build up a big enough points gap as we go into the second half of the season over Oscar, then he will get towards the title. I think McLaren will also, if there's other drivers in the mix, we don't know if that's going to be the case, but they will probably put their back in behind Lando because they're so desperate to win a title. It's been so long. However, if Oscar is more or less, within touching distance, especially when you get down to like 7-8 races to go, certainly last 5 races, I think he's got the mental strength and not to say Lando doesn't, but he's got this edge to him that perhaps Lando doesn't. And I think that could be the difference in a straight fight between the two of them for the title if McLaren let them go at it. And that's why I think Guenther's point is very valid. And at the moment, if Oscar can continue the performance that he's shown, obviously there was a slip up in Australia, but the performance has been there in China. He was, genuinely the better of the two drivers. Lando talks a lot about the struggles he's having with the car, that he has to completely change his natural driving style just to get the performance out of the car. Oscar agrees it's not the easiest car to drive, but he doesn't seem to be having the same challenge. So perhaps, over these next few races, even Oscar can really reel in that gap that got created because of what happened in Australia.
Knowing what you know, though, about McLaren as a team, if they are close, Nate, by the last 6-7 races of the season, how do they handle that situation? Will they let them fight for it? Or do you think that they start inserting themselves into races to dictate who wins?
Yeah, I mean, they insisted, didn't they, at the beginning of the year, these two are free to race. And then we saw, 20-something laps into Australia. They were obviously told, which was, the way McLaren said that was it was a temporary order while they were clearing traffic at a pretty dangerous part in the race. So, you could see it as quite a smart way to handle that race, but the optics of it isn't great. I think this is the bit about Piastri beating Norris that does make sense, is that I don't think McLaren fully appreciate how difficult that is going to... I think they do appreciate how difficult it's going to be managing those two, but I think that they're far more confident in their abilities to handle that than they maybe should be, just because I don't think they've ever really categorically seem to be on top of that. If you look at the papaya rules last year was the famous one. Piastri just goes around the outside of Lando in Monza. They'd both been told exactly the same thing by Zach Brown, but Piastri's had a different interpretation of what that meant to Lando. McLaren afterwards were like, well, yeah, shouldn't have happened. Somebody at McLaren quite high up there. It wasn't Zach, but it wasn't Andrea Stella either. But somebody fairly high up in the team said, actually quite impressive, because Oscar just kind of went with it and showed a bit more of a ruthless edge there. So even within the team, there's this understanding that, look, Piastri is the guy that maybe sees things a little differently. Think back to Hungary when Lando spent the whole race deciding, am I going to give back this race win to Oscar? Obviously he did in the end. So yeah, I think that the mental bit of this that Laurence mentioned, I think then is played out double when they come to doing team orders and papaya rules or whatever they're going to call it, because I think that Piastri is that more ruthless guy of the two. And the way McLaren should handle it is try and do what Mercedes did with Rosberg and Hamilton, is say, you two guys are going to race, generally speaking, until we on the pit will think a win or a 1-2 or whatever is at risk if we don't stop you from fighting. And the drivers need to be on board with that fully. And I think this is where the cadence of the season will dictate if they're okay with that, because if Lando's running away with it, like Laurence said, it's easy to make those calls later on. If it stays super close, they're going to have moments. I mean, they're all very pally after the Chinese Grand Prix. And I remember in 2014, the first couple races, Hamilton and Rosberg were all friendly, back slapping, and then it immediately swung around. I think it was Spain, wasn't it, Laurence? And then Monaco, where they had two different things happened. Obviously, then
Definitely Monaco.
Yeah, the Monaco thing with Rosberg and the qualifying, and the whole tone and atmosphere completely changed, and the way Mercedes then had to manage that completely changed as well. So McLaren is only one of those moments away from that becoming a really, really difficult thing to manage this season. And I don't believe that two drivers who are as good as those two and as ambitious as those two can stay completely harmonious through a season like this if they're the two guys going for it. It's just natural that they won't. So yeah, I think that McLaren handling it is going to be something they struggle with, and it could end up really be the thing that kind of drags the drivers both apart as well.
At the risk of like self-promotion a little bit like Nate here, I was in the UK this week. I'm working on a feature about Zach Brown, and I had a really great sit-down discussion with him. And honestly, most of the conversation is about his life and how this, Southern California kid grew up to be the CEO of McLaren. It's a really fascinating story. But one of the things that we were talking about is sort of like the McLaren turnaround. When he walked in the door in 2016, he was like, God, the team was a mess, and like where they are now. And it wasn't some like overnight switch where they became like the best team on the grid, obviously. But one of the things that stood out to me the most, and it was just like this moment, is something that like what Katie was just like alluding to, like who are they going to support? And Zach said when they went into last season, he said being involved in the championship fight was not on his radar. He said his number one goal was to get Lando a win. And then he was like, Lando, Oscar too. And I thought that is like a super duper telling sentence, because the team's CEO seems so much more in the corner of Lando. And it's not a slight to Oscar. It's not. It's just that, we don't like to have favorite children, but there was like the impression there that maybe a little bit Lando is the chosen son.
But I also think too, Zach Brown feels an obligation to Lando, because what season was it? Was it 2 or 3 seasons ago? Remember when Drive to Survive came out, and it just gave you some snippets of some really awkward moments between Lando and Zach Brown, because Lando was very frustrated with where the team was at, where the car was at, where they were at.
2023 when they were like awful?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember exactly, but like Zach Brown had to keep saying like, stick with us, like we're gonna get there, like believe in this team, like I promise you we're gonna get there. And Lando showed a lot of faith. I don't know where he was at with his contract, but there could have been thoughts that Lando might have left McLaren if he didn't have belief in Zach Brown and the trajectory of where this team was going to go. And so I feel like Zach Brown feels a little bit of an obligation, Laz. I don't know if you get that sense that, Lando stuck with us when we were in the dog days, when we were really bad. And now that we're kind of reaping the benefits, Teddy, I'm in the middle of something. I don't know if you can hear my dog barking, but it just feels like Zach wants to do right by Lando and they succeed together.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a bit of that. And because he was part of the junior program when, he was, before he made it into F1, there's this real connection with Lando. And of course, going into last year, he'd earned the nickname Lando No Wins kind of unfairly. But, whenever a win was on the table, it seemed to slip through his fingers. Russia was that obvious one, I think, in, what was it, 21? Or 20, it must have been 21.
21.
So there was so many incidents like that where it's like Lando should have won a race but didn't win a race, and then it just felt like he needed to win that year. Whereas Oscar, it was only his second year in Formula One. I think it's perhaps putting a little bit of extra pressure on someone in that situation, certainly where they thought they were at the start of last year, to say, this is the year that you win a race. But I think within the team, they do a very good job, actually, at giving the impression, I think, that it's fairly evenly balanced. But within the team, it'll be interesting if we do get to that scenario Nate was talking about, where there's a championship on the line, because in Oscar's corner is also Mark Webber, who anyone who, watched Formula One back in the 2010s will know is a very feisty character. He's Sebastian Vettel's teammate when they were going for championships at Red Bull. And he's just as feisty now. So I think he'll be a strong force within the team to make sure that Oscar is, he's not actually within the team, but, in the team's orbit, to make sure Oscar's getting a fair shot at it as well. As he should, as his manager.
Right. Let's take a look at what we have coming up this weekend. Back on track. Our little, mini national nightmare is over because we had the weekend off last weekend. You guys are in Japan as we speak. How's the time difference? But Laz, you made a comment earlier about how Suzuka is like so unforgiving. What about this track makes it its own like living, breathing creature character just on its own?
So the thing that really shocked me when I first went there was the speed of the corners, which is insanely fast. I really do. We say it's about a lot of circuits, but I really do think it's the best place to go and watch Formula One cars to understand what they are capable of. And it will blow your mind. You won't quite believe what they are capable of. But combined with those fast corners is tiny, tiny runoff areas. The barriers are so much closer than they look on TV. And you've got, rather than, tarmac runoff in most of the corners, you've got gravel and grass. And the gravel does slow the car quite quickly, but the grass doesn't. And, it's so easy to get offline. And it's a bit like, a slalom skier in the Winter Olympics. They have to pick the right line. And the minute they get slightly off it and they get, on the ice or ski goes askew, then the whole run is ruined. And, you're going to be seconds off where you need to be to win a medal. It's the same thing at Suzuka in those S's at the start of the lap. You have to be bang on the line and keep it in that groove. And the minute the car is misbehaving or you're unable to do it, the lap is lost. And so it's that all or nothing thing that the drivers absolutely love. I'm sure many drivers ahead of this weekend will say it's their favorite track, and with good reason. And from a spectator's point of view, it's not an easy one for most people in the US or the UK to travel to because it's so far away. But if you ever get the opportunity, my God, there's, really is nowhere else where the sheer speed, high speed cornering ability of these cars comes across.
So there are a couple of special liveries, like we already talked about it a little bit with Yuki. Yuki gets the white Red Bull. It's cool. I'm not gonna lie. It's a very cool looking car. You guys were at the launch, were you not?
Not the launch, but an event with the new car.
You know what I mean?
And it honestly, it looks fantastic. They've done such a good job with it. It
was a rainy reveal, was it not?
It was.
It was very wet, which was a bit of a shame.
You take your rain jacket?
Oh yeah, and some umbrellas from 7-Eleven as well.
What about those gloves from the F175 event?
No, I haven't found those. Haven't found those again. Those have been retired.
What's the weather look like for the weekend then?
It looks better, doesn't it?
It looks better. It's been really hard to predict here. I came straight from China to here and spent a bit of time just traveling around. It started off, and I was in Tokyo, and it was t-shirt weather. You go out and the sun was out and it's beautiful. Within the space of a couple of days over the weekend, the temperatures have just dropped, and at the moment it's 5 degrees, possibly less now actually, because we're right into the middle of the night. maybe 2 degrees or so, and it feels that cold out there. But yeah, my weather app reliably, well, not so reliably, but it does inform me that it's going to be up to about kind of mid-teens, maybe even 20 degrees over the weekend in Suzuka, which is a good temperature to be racing Formula One cars. But if it's as cold as it is now, then yeah, the few teams are going to have a few struggles, I think.
Reminder to our friends at home, this man speaks in Celsius, not in Fahrenheit. So
yes.
2 is like 35, 20 would be what, mid-60s?
That sounds about right.
Mid-60s? Yeah, sorry.
I think so.
Again, math, not my strong suit, but I'm trying to do the translation in my head. It's not just Red Bull that has the different livery. Haas has it too. And I was joking with you guys earlier because it's got the cherry blossoms on it and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It looks a little bit like Nate's bedroom right now on the wall, your wallpaper. But I was like, it's so pretty. Also, it makes my allergies. Like, it makes me want to sneeze just looking at it.
I wish they'd give me a hotel that was that colorful, because mine's very, very bland and drab. But yeah, the Haas, I'm going to say the Haas one looks fantastic. And that obviously marks their partnership with Toyota, another one of the major Japanese manufacturers. And I think both of those cars coming down are going to, at turn 1 will look fantastic. And yeah, I think I've always spoken about it, but more one-off liveries. Let's do more of them. Let's make them look that good. Let's make them mean something as well. Like, don't just do one for the sake of it, like mark a home race or a partnership. But yeah, I think if they're done as well as that, then because there's been a few over the years that haven't been that good. I think it's hard to get everyone happy. But yeah, those two look fantastic. And
I think go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, and the cherry blossom, we're really lucky this time of year because we've been able to come here and the cherry blossoms are starting to bloom. And it looks fantastic. So that touch on the Haas, Red Bull have gone towards like the colors of the flag, the kind of striking red and white, and then Haas have lent into the cherry blossom. So between them, they've picked 2 of probably the most iconic, things you could have done, bar like having a bunch of Pokemon or anime characters all over your car. It's pretty much as iconically Japanese as you can get with both of those guys. So I think they've done a great job.
I just think we're excited about Red Bull's livery because they never skew very far in their actual livery for their entire season. So finally getting to see something with drastic difference is just a breath of fresh air. And so I think both of them look awesome.
The other cool thing about the story of this Red Bull livery is that they did one in 2021, a white Red Bull that people may remember, but it never raced in Japan. And the intention was that it raced in Japan. But of course, it was COVID-19, pandemic year, more or less, and so we weren't allowed to travel to Japan, and so there was no Japanese Grand Prix. So it ran at the Turkish Grand Prix, which still looked great, but it didn't really have the same meaning. So the fact they've done it here, but also they've kind of tweaked it enough with this latest one to make it look really good. And one of the things which may not have come across in the photos, but when you see it in person, and hopefully will come across with some of the camera angles we have over the weekend at Suzuka, is it's actually like a satin finish. So it's kind of like it's got this real like luster, and like the Red Bull and the Honda logos are all kind of slightly shiny red, and just in person it looks fantastic. We talked about favorite liveries at the start of the season. I think a lot of us went for the Racing Bulls. For me, that outstrips all of them. I think that's one of the best liveries we've seen in F1 for a long time.
I didn't know it had the sheen. I hadn't picked up on that at all.
Yeah, it looks really cool.
I'm the person who, like Katie, in the NBA, I like the home and away, and maybe give me one good black. In Major League Baseball, like when they do those freaking city selects, I'm like, get off my lawn, give me the normal colors. Like, you're a Yankee, you should be in pinstripes. I'm sorry, I hate the yellow Red Sox uniforms. I hate them with a passion. So like normally for me, like when I like it when the teams go for the old school. Like I don't know. I like tradition. I like to know what to expect. But the fact that I do like this one, I do like it because it, for both of them, like you said, it feels like an honest like tribute. So like to me, it's cool. Also, I like the fact that like Haas gets to roll this out after what they did 10 days ago now, but like, what they did, like that's a double points weekend for Haas. That is not something to sit on. So like, how do they build on that and continue to sort of do what they've been doing, not just this season, but last season? This was a team that's like turning the corner and doing better things. How do they do that, Nate?
Well, I think, yeah, and you can feel that excitement among Haas at the moment. And I think what China showed was that I don't know whether I overlooked it at the start of the year, but I think the Ocon-Behrman driver pairing is really, really exciting. You've got a really good mix of talent there. And as much as we said, Katie, and I agree with you, I love Guenther Steiner, but I think that the team has definitely turned a corner when it comes to engineering under Komatsu. You can definitely tell there's a different momentum behind the way they're upgrading the car. There's a different kind of focus around the way they're building it. So really, I think they've just got to keep doing what they've been doing since Komatsu came in. I think he's taken an engineer's approach to that job. Guenther Steiner obviously came from a different background, and I think Guenther Steiner helped make the team what it is today. So it's not a knock on him at all. And yeah, with Behrman and Ocon there, I mean, both those guys look really, really good. I know that Kimi Antonelli won the driver of the day in China, but Ocon was a really underrated drive in China. That kind of first big result he's had for Haas. And I think he's going to keep doing that for them all year. So yeah, hopefully that was a sign of things to come. I know it was a weird race, but I've got quiet confidence that is the trajectory Haas's season can continue to go on. Big points here and there where they can get them. And yeah, I think they've got two drivers in there who can keep doing that for them for sure.
The only question mark is that the car was so bad in Australia. It's like a real Jekyll and Hyde situation. Yeah. And I don't think they fully understand they certainly don't understand why it was so bad in Australia. I'm not sure they're that clued in on why it was then brilliant in China. And that's always obviously you get good results, it's good in Formula One, but if you don't understand it can be tricky. And they thought it was so bad in Australia when they put it on track after testing in Bahrain, where they were fairly confident. So bad in Australia that they thought something was broken on it. They were convinced, like, I don't know, the chassis had cracked or something on the way to Australia. Just something wasn't right, but they couldn't extract the performance from it. And Australia has quite a lot of high-speed corners. It feels like a very different circuit to Suzuka because, it's a parkland circuit and Suzuka's a permanent one. But it has a lot of high-speed corners in Australia, and there's a lot of high-speed corners here in Suzuka. So it'll be a real test to see if they have actually just kind of flushed out the gremlins they had at the first race and the car is now okay, or whether there are actually more deep-seated issues that didn't appear in China but could actually continue to hit that team as they go around different circuits.
Also remember, it wasn't just like the circuit gremlins and we thought we had a cracked chassis. Like Ollie Behrman didn't exactly give them much of a runway to work with all of his practice issues. So there were also like rookie gremlins in Australia as well that seemed to have like at least worked themselves out a smidge in China. I don't know if you guys know this, but Nate has recently been promoted to the president of the Lance Stroll fan club. It's a position which he has accepted with great pride. Let's be honest. Like, Nate isn't exactly like the biggest Lance Stroll fan. I'm not sure Katie is either. But if you look at the points so far, that man is currently sitting with 10 championship points. He is 8th in the championship. And if you look at who is behind him, you're going to find a couple of Ferrari drivers. Not exactly something to sleep on. I realized that there were some issues in China and both of the Ferrari drivers were DQ'd, but Lance has been consistent. Lance has been there. Lance is scoring points. Has his performance in the first 2 weeks of the season, like, has it altered your view on him at all?
Keyword 2 weeks. Sorry. Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, it hasn't massively yet, to be honest. I don't think that. I mean, look, whenever a driver finishes in the points, you got to give him credit. It's you deliver on what the car can put forward. But Stroll's problem has never been that he's rubbish every single weekend or that he's struggled every single weekend. His issue is that there's been so many moments in his career where the performance has just gone away. There's been weird crashes, whatever. So I don't think 2 races changes that for me. He's a quick driver, Stroll, on his day when he wants to be. And you talk to people who have worked with him before, and they say that's not the issue. It's just that sometimes that just disappears or he's just not in the race. And the interesting thing from the Aston Martin point of view there is the aura around Alonso feels to maybe be waning a little bit. Just, he had that crash in Australia. I know he retired through no fault of his own in China. But that now doesn't seem to be as strong as maybe it was a few years ago. And I feel that's where I'll give Stroll some credit. I'll feel, his last 2 teammates have been 2 of the best drivers of this current millennium, Fernando Alonso and Sebastian Vettel. And he definitely wasn't completely embarrassed by Vettel. It's been very one-sided, generally speaking, against Alonso. So, high bar to measure him against. But no, 2 races hasn't changed my mind. But look, if at the end of the year, if Stroll's still performing like that, then especially if we think that Aston comes into 26 with a car that's maybe can challenge for wins, I think you have to start saying, well, look, like maybe this guy does have something. Maybe this guy, it is there. But at the moment, no, I'm still, I'm not sure if I'm president of that club you mentioned, Nicole,
You're the
professionally.
president and Katie is the vice president.
Okay. Well, yeah, and look, I'm happy to tender my resignation at the end of the year if things keep going well for him. But no, at the moment, and to be honest, Aston have flown so far under the radar this year that probably, it hasn't seemed that spectacular, and maybe I'm sleeping on it. I have to say, one thing that we did do. So I'm in a group chat with Laurence, Chris, and our Canadian colleague Tim Hauraney, which I set up. So but we just I called it the Lance Stroll Excuse Committee, and we used to just ask Tim, "What's the excuse today, Tim, about Lance?" I've changed the group name as a joke after Australia to the Fernando Alonso Excuse Committee. So it's no longer a chat where we just talk about Stroll. And to be fair, we haven't put anything in there really for a while. But yeah, so I still don't think I'm going to change my mind that quickly.
I'm sorry. I don't even know if it's, I mean, I'm not looking for a position on the board here, but I don't know if this is actually an indictment on like how consistent Lance Stroll is. It's more an indictment of how crap Ferrari has been.
Yeah, and two of the result, that's two races versus one effectively.
Yeah.
Well, I know Lewis won the sprint. I think the biggest thing for me, the biggest question about Stroll has always been, when that car gets better, where is the performance then? It's I think that's always been the thing I've wanted to see. I've always wanted to see Lance Stroll in a team where he's not so closely associated with his dad, to see how he can do, because I think that there is some talent there. But when we saw Aston have that spike in 2023, Stroll just wasn't there. I know he was carrying an injury with him, but he recovered from that, and the performances didn't recover with it. So yeah, I think that's the biggest issue with Stroll, is when the car gets more competitive, I don't think he necessarily does. And that ultimately is always going to be the rap on him until he shows otherwise.
I just think, to put a bow on this, you give him credit because while Alonso hasn't performed, obviously, and to no fault of his own, when his teammates not bringing in points, he's brought in points. So you deserve credit for that. You're keeping your team in the hunt in the constructor's standpoint. Now the question is, as an individual driver, can you maintain the consistency throughout the course of the season? You're going to have a bad race here or two, or something's going to happen out of your control. That's just the sport. But can you maintain? And so I think for us, we would just like to see Lance Stroll maintain that consistency.
I think consistency obviously has been like the hallmark to what McLaren has been able to do, not just this season, but where they were last season as well. But the other team that has been crazy consistent this year already, and yet how long have we been talking here? We haven't really brought up Mercedes once, not a single time. And they have a rookie who is the driver of the week in China. Like, Laz, is this a good thing, the fact that they are so consistent, but yet they're not the center of attention, and they're just quietly doing their thing and flying under the radar? How is this playing exactly into their hands?
It's very good news for Mercedes, because the previous few seasons have been the exact opposite. You would turn up at a circuit and not know which Mercedes you were going to get, or you'd turn up and because it's cold weather or a particularly smooth track surface, you knew that Mercedes were able to run their car where they wanted it and would extract the performance. But as soon as they got hotter or there's a bumpy track surface, they had to take it out of its kind of happy window, and then it would lose all performance. So the fact that they've gone to 2 circuits so far, it is a sample of 2. I think we have to kind of say that before we make any judgment at the moment about the competitive order. But the fact they've gone to 2 different circuits, slightly different conditions, there was a wet as well, and the car's performed well and just been in George Russell's hands, particularly, a podium contender and right up there, is incredibly positive for the team, because that's pretty much what their target was. And it shows that, albeit in the last year of these regulations, perhaps they're starting to get the understanding that they've been searching for so long. So I think it's an incredibly positive thing. And I don't think, at the moment, Mercedes, they're not where they want to be, which is, of course, at the very front. And the fact that one of their engine customer team, McLaren, is ahead of them is slightly embarrassing. That's always going to be a situation like that if you're the works team and you've got a customer team beating you. But I think it's progress in the right direction, and it's clearly things are just starting to click a little bit more into place compared to where they've been for the last few years, where it's been all over the place. So, yeah, positive. But, you know, that's a team that we would almost start every podcast talking about, you know, over the last 10 years or so, because they were always right at the very top and they're still not there. So, you know, they'll be happy, but they won't be ecstatic with the way the start of the season's gone.
I think I've been waiting for things to click with Carlos Sainz at Williams. Like, obviously, Australia, there was the, I don't want, like, we'll call it, what do you want to call the mistake that he made in Australia? Because, like, it was like an unfamiliarity thing where he just, like, hit the wrong button and, like, the car did something he wasn't expecting it. And even in the rain, where he's normally so good, he crashed out of Australia. And then, yeah, he was in the points in China, but he was only in the points after the DQs by Gasly and the two Ferraris. So, yeah, it turned into a double points day for Williams. And yes, they've already scored more points this season than they did all of last season. And yes, largely, they are not putting together a disassembled Lego after every weekend. So all of that is good. However, like, I'm waiting for it to click with Sainz. I'm waiting for him to show more consistency. I'm waiting for, honestly, I was waiting for him to, like, go out and just be, like, the number one driver. And Albon has outperformed him, like, the first 2 weeks easily. So, like, is it coming? Is this the weekend?
So. Yeah, I think so. And again, I mean, I think there's been the theme of the kind of all the talk around this, you know, this Lawson news and everything is, you know, 2 races is a really small sample size for this. And I think that, generally speaking, in Australia, all the drivers that switch teams seem to struggle. Obviously, some more than others, like Lawson. But also, I think that we've got to remember that I think, you know, one of my favorite drivers on the grid is Alex Albon. I don't think he's underrated. I think people know how good he is, but I think he's a really good driver, you know. And I think one day, hopefully, he gets a car up at the front end of the grid where he can show that again. You know, don't think he got the fair shake at Red Bull. And he's come into effectively Albon's team, you know, quote unquote Albon's team. Albon's been there for a few years. You know, he knows, you know, the car is obviously going to have been an extension of last year. So I think it's coming. And James Vowles doesn't sound alarmed by Sainz. You know, he said, we need to work with Carlos. Carlos, we know he's going to get better. We've got to help him. You know, he's used to doing things a certain way at Ferrari. He's come here. You know, it's a harder car to drive. So, you know, I don't think there's any residual fear yet at Williams that what they've seen from Carlos so far is the way things are going to come. It's just natural. A driver who's moved is struggling. And I actually think Carlos is the kind of driver as well that he's so harsh on himself. You know, he still carries such a big chip on his shoulder that he won't be, you know, there'll be no doubt in his mind that, you know, a turnaround's coming. And as soon as a driver like Carlos Sainz does get that kind of magic result, you know, that big result, I think that's when things kick around because the confidence comes and he just finds a good rhythm. So yeah, whether it's this weekend or not, I don't know. But I mean, I don't think that's going to be the story of the season for Carlos Sainz. You know, I think he's going to be a lot better kind of come the middle of the year. And, you know, as soon as they get Sainz firing all cylinders, that lineup as well is absolutely cooking because Albon has looked great for a long time as well. So, yeah, I think it's coming. You know, I'm a big fan of Sainz as well. I think we all are on here. So I'd be very surprised if what we've seen so far is what the year's going to look like for him.
Is there anyone else going into this weekend that we've not hit on yet? Anyone else that we need to be, like, keeping our eyes on?
Well, remarkably, we've not really spoken about Lewis Hamilton in this podcast. Pretty much every other podcast this year has been a little bit of a Lewis Hamilton show, I have to admit. But I think it'll be very interesting here because in Australia, the area that he admitted he was struggling, and it was very clear in the data that he was struggling compared to Leclerc, was the high-speed corners. So turn 9 and 10, you know, he was losing quite a lot of time there. There was other parts of the track where he was actually quicker or, you know, clearly doing stuff with the car that was getting performance that maybe Leclerc didn't have access to. So Suzuka, with all its high-speed corners, will be interested to see if Lewis can be on the pace of Leclerc or ahead of him as he was in the sprint race in China and sprint qualifying. So I think that's going to be a key one just to monitor that Lewis Hamilton progress, which we know is happening. There's no doubt that in China, he was already that step ahead. Of course, he, like I said, won the sprint race. But yeah, again, this will be another test because of the nature of the circuit to see whether some of the things that he was lacking confidence with in Australia have been sorted out or he's found ways to work around it.
I don't want to brag or anything, but Laz, you and I have a massive lead in our championship.
I think
Massive.
you have
Right
one
away.
point, don't you?
Two
I think
races,
I
Two
missed
races,
a week as
Katie.
well. I'm in the Ferrari boat here, where I had a whole week expunged from the record. So
Wait, Katie
let's
hasn't
say that-
even been on the show.
I know, and I'm right. I'm tied with you, Nate. So that makes me
yeah,
feel
I
a
know.
lot
I'm
better.
fully aware.
Like,
Well, I'm having a Carlos Sainz turnaround this weekend.
this
Just
is
one.
way harder than I thought it was going to be because we have to get the podium exactly right. I just thought,
Yeah.
I just have to get somebody in like on the podium and I would get like some points
No,
for it.
I
No, I have to
know.
get it exactly right. This is why I don't gamble. This is why right here. All right.
Should have
So
boxed it like horse racing. So if they just get on the podium, you at least get a point. But no,
Right.
you got to
now
slow
I
'em perfectly.
understand. Now I understand why you get like double points if you get it exactly, like all three of them. If you hit the
Really?
trifecta. Gambling, that's my thing. So anyway, Nate and I have one whole point. Nate,
No, you and Laz
sorry,
have.
Laz and I have
Yeah.
one whole point.
Yeah.
One whole point. That is also our lead because Katie hasn't picked it all this season, and Nate hasn't been here since the first week of the season. So, Katie,
Oh, girl, let me
wanna
pick
you want to go first? Yes.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
I'd love to.
I write this down and then I rip it up, but I am going to write it down.
Okay, high speed corner. Okay, I'm gonna go Lando Norris.
Wait, this is third or is this?
He won.
Okay.
He won. Oh, are we still doing the 3-1?
I don't know. You
Katie,
tell me.
you do how you want.
Whatever you
Whatever you feel good with.
World's my
Whatever you feel
oyster.
good with.
P1 Lando Norris. I don't want to be boring.
Hey, don't feel too
P2.
bad. Laurence and I picked the exact same top three in the exact same order.
Okay, well, I was thinking about adding George, but you know what? I'm gonna put Max up there, P2. And then I'm gonna put Oscar P3.
Okay. I like it.
We'll see.
Nate, you want to play this week? Are you too
Yeah, I
big
think
for
so.
us?
I'm gonna have a go. I'm gonna go. Well, yeah.
This-
Which way around?
Is this 3 to
I'll
1
go-
or
I'll
is this
tell you
1 to
what,
3?
Let's see where Katie went. I'm
Sorry.
going to say first Oscar Piastri, second Lando Norris, third Max Verstappen. It's tempted to put Yuki there, but I mean, unless it rains, I don't think Yuki's going to be anywhere near the podium.
Can
Sadly.
you imagine?
Oh, that would be unbelievable if Yuki got there. But, I mean,
Wild.
He'd be a
Yeah.
god.
The Japanese fans are really incredible. Like
Mhm.
the Japanese fans are incredible for all the drivers, not just like their own. They're the most passionate group. They're kind of fun. All right, Laz. I have already written mine
So-
down just for the record.
Okay.
To prove that we don't have the same brain again.
All right. Okay.
Is this
Well,
1 to
a
3 or 3
continuation
to
of
1?
theme. Okay, I'll go 3 to 1. Why not?
Okay.
So in third place, Charles Leclerc.
Mm.
Because no one said a Ferrari yet, I don't think. In second place, Oscar Piastri, and in first place, Lando Norris. Boring, but I'm just trying to get the points early in the season.
I like
I
that.
need to send you that Nigel Farage meme where he's like, boring. I've seen that one.
I'm not
Is
sure
that
that
what
translates,
you wrote
but
down, Nicole?
maybe
But
it
it also
will.
wins you the
Maybe it will.
championship. So keep, it's going to be a lot of McLaren 1-2s this year, I think. So
I think so too. That is not what I wrote down. We do not have the same brain
Good.
this week.
Oh, wow.
I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3. Oscar with the win. Charles with second, and I'm gonna throw George up there in third.
Nice. I was considering
Three
George. I think it's a
team.
good shout.
Yeah,
Yeah.
3 team.
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that.
That's what I'm.
That'd be a good
what I'm
race.
going with.
I'd like to see that race.
I'm
Who'd you
super
put
excited.
in second? Charles?
I did Charles. Yeah,
Okay.
Charles
Okay.
second, George
Nice.
third. I'm super excited because the sports center that I'm on this weekend, we lead into the race, and then we get to stick around for the race and do another show after the race, and that would be like 3 o'clock in the morning. So sleep is like entirely
What time
optional.
is it Eastern? I need to look. What
3
time-
a.m. It starts at 1 a.m. Eastern.
Starts at 1. Your show's 3 at the post game.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my first show is at midnight, leading
Okay.
into the race. Hey guys, let's try to get you on the show this weekend. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. And then, we get to do a one after that. So
Nice.
sleep. Who needs sleep? It's fine. Katie, do we get you back next week? She's
Depends on
like, it depends on how I do with my picks.
Yeah. I'm heading to Sacramento for some NBA, and then we have the last regular season game of the year next Sunday. and then the play-in begins. So depending on when you guys sit down to film,
right, we won't hold her to
we're
it.
We're on such weird time zones, you know. I think it'll be easier next week getting us all together.
Yeah. All right, guys, it's been fun. Remember, if you were checking us out on the ESPN YouTube channel, we're here all season long. That's where you can get all your F1 content. If you're listening somewhere else, just hit us up with that 5-star review. We love you. We'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.